And so if I can get to the quiet place, then it can open up and the resolution can somehow work its way through.
So here we go. Let's welcome everybody. And the wacky psychotherapists are having another go at having a conversation and hoping it's a therapeutic conversation. Roland's going to start by reading a little poem.
No, well, it's not a poem. It's actually it's a chunk out of Chuang Tzu, which is like after the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, this is the most important of the Taoist classics. And
Mm,
it's from about, I think, 400 BC. I think that's about when he was. And he was a real person. They actually do know this. And this is
mm,
a lovely quote from him
mhm,
on tranquility and stillness. So the sages are quiescent, not because of any value in being quiescent. They simply are still. Not even the multitude of beings can disturb them, so they are calm. Water, when it is still, reflects back even your eyebrows and beard. It is perfectly level, and from this the carpenter takes his level. If water stilled offers such clarity, imagine what pure spirit offers. The sage's heart is stilled. Heaven and earth are reflected in it, and the mirror of all life. Empty, still, calm, plain, quiet, silent, non-active. This is the centeredness of heaven and earth, and of the Tao and of virtue.
nice. That's lovely.
I know.
Lovely.
I came about it just this morning. It's like, whoa, this
Mm,
speaks to me. You know, it always talks about these sages which have names which we don't recognize, but
mm,
reflect that kind of inner wisdom, if you like.
nice. Okay, so what that makes me kind of think of is therapeutic presence.
Hmm.
And in therapeutic presence, it's like what that sits on as a kind of responsiveness and an openness, receptivity. It sits upon that stillness, that spacious level. And the kind of other reference point was like the mirror. And so it reflects back, but it also is like an underpinning, a secure underpinning for deep listening. So I find that really helpful to think of inner stillness as a kind of basis from which we work. But in that level above, we're also, resident in all sorts of ways that aren't necessarily about stillness or about responsiveness,
Mm.
kind of feeling aliveness to what people are saying. And maybe there's even stillness above that, that level of responsiveness, because it's like it gives you in Buddhism, they talk about patient pausing. So,
That's a very nice way of thinking about it.
yeah. So it gives you a chance to kind of be with what's arising and what you're hearing without, reacting, but in really kind of getting it, like you're kind of feeling deeply into that meaning making that the person's sharing with you.
Mm. Yeah, there's a number of issues that you bring up which are very important. One is how do we maintain that inner sense of calm, quiet, which is very receptive, and yet also be reflective and active on the outside? How do we keep that balance between those two aspects? And one of the things I do, and I don't know if you do this, before I see a client, I usually take a couple of minutes, sometimes a little longer just to get really quiet and to kind of get a sense or a feeling of like where I am,
Mhm.
and even as kind of a projective sense of where my client may be. And I found that that actually is pretty accurate.
Mm,
Found that a little odd sometimes that I will actually check in and I will go like, I don't think they're doing very well. And this is before I've seen them.
mm,
And so
mm,
I'm a bit prepared. Now, I don't know if that is imagination, but I've been doing it for years and years. And I checked it out when I used to see people face to face, because I would be sitting and I'd get quiet and I go like, okay, that person's in the waiting room. How are they? It's like, oh, not so good this time. And it
mm,
was pretty good, pretty accurate. I don't know where that information comes from,
mm,
but if we're still, we get different kinds of information.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. When I give myself that space as a kind of prep, I like Winnicott's term about the prepared environment. And and so if I have that space, it's usually to kind of come away from anything that is there in me about me, my life, occurrences, thoughts I've been having, things I've been
Mhm.
doing, and just to kind of create a clean and clear space for opening to the mystery of what's going to happen today. And also, I might see if I have been preoccupied in any way, like holding this person in my thoughts or doing any work in relation to our previous session on a deeper kind of feeling into some of what they brought last time. Because sometimes I find I get kind of set to do some work by a session, and in between, I'll be kind of reflecting on something or feeling or wondering what that was about, or I might even go and do some reading about certain things that
Mm.
make me, or I might take it to supervision. But it's like there's work that I've got to do between sessions. It might just be holding the person in my thoughts now and then. And sometimes that goes on in the background because I think probably on some level I hold everybody in my thoughts quite lightly.
Well, I'm wondering about holding it in the thoughts, which is a more cognitive thing, or whether we hold them in a different way, and which is harder to describe. Certainly, if somebody comes into my thoughts in between sessions, I
Mm,
always find that is a really important piece of information because I've pretty much trained myself not to think about people.
mm,
And so I'm always kind of waiting for like intuition or intimations about what I might do or might not do. And
mm,
often I'll write little things, but I'll write a little note to myself on my notes, like do this or try this. This is an issue. What it is. And it doesn't always come to pass, but it's kind of helpful, that kind of thing. But when
mm,
you were talking about
mm,
quiet, inner quiet, that tranquility or that, and the idea of the metaphor of water, which is that if we're like a still pond and something drops into it,
mm,
it drops in and then you see those ripples, they go out in a circle and they go out and out and out. And sometimes I think maybe I don't take enough time sometimes when somebody said something to allow the ripples to go out far enough.
mm,
I catch the ripples too soon after the
mm, mm,
something that's dropped, and that's my own impatience and something I have to kind of like remind myself, which is like, okay. This is this is not about trying to do something.
mm,
It's trying to come from a place of not just receptivity, but of inner quiet, which allows something else to happen,
mm,
which is not necessarily planned in my mind.
mm. Do you know the phrase the unthought known?
Yeah, you've mentioned that before, the unthought known, and I think I tried looking it up and I got distracted, I think.
It's got Christopher Bolas.
Oh, yes.
Um, he, I think he maybe coined it. When I first came across that kind of the combination of those two things, Winnicott's holding a baby in your thoughts, holding another in your thoughts,
Hmm.
and the thought known. Like I would often, in working with mothers and babies, when mothers were, really kind of pretty in love with their babies, and if I ran across them in the street and the baby was in the buggy, and they were talking to me like this, they would be kind of looking back at their baby, right? So in some ways, it's both an unthought known of love, right? And and it's also holding the baby in your thoughts in
Mm.
terms of like an intentionality that words allow us to kind of more expansively understand concepts and experiences and the importance of things. So it's like quite a sophisticated thing to hold somebody else in your thoughts, where a much more primitive, lower chakra thing is to kind of have somebody like in your thoughts, but not necessarily, troubled, or it's more kind of possessive.
Mm. A lot of kind of half thoughts going, unthought thoughts, if you like, which are floating around in my head, which is that,
Half thoughts.
yeah, like holding your client, not forgetting them. And that's not thinking about them, but it's
Mm,
not forgetting them. I think that some people have been so forgotten
mm,
and so unremembered
mm,
in their lifetime,
mm,
in their childhood.
mm,
And I've had clients who've said that, which is like, my mother would just leave
mm,
and she'd forget that I was there at home,
mm,
by myself as a child.
mm.
The worst case of that was a client who actually found out that at the age, I know, and you wonder if a person can ever recover from that kind of traumatic deprivation.
Also like betrayal.
But the mother was really quite disturbed, obviously, and abusive. But so you just think, all right, that person has the sense that they're not held by anything. They
Mm,
are completely and utterly floating, and that they need to be remembered. They need to be held somehow and
mm.
not forgotten.
Yeah. Again, Winnicott talks about how having those kind of abandonment experiences causes a child to have feelings of falling forever, falling apart,
Right.
or being dropped. I often think in working with couples where there's been a betrayal,
Hmm.
it activates a lot of that early life. When you said, can a person ever get over that? Often, I ask myself in relation to a lot of the experiences of betrayal where the partner wants to continue, let's say the woman wants to continue, but her husband, he wants to continue too, but he went through a serious period of betraying and also lying about that, and even turning it around, kind of say, why are you disbelieving me?
Yeah, the gaslighting thing.
I would never lie to you. And how somebody, when that triggers such early life, we all have some early life abandonment experiences. So when can somebody really, or it's more like how does one ever get over that kind of experience of abandonment and betrayal? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm just thinking is that, first of all, you wonder, like, how do you ever get over it, just as you're saying. But the other part of it is that people do. And then what is that process? Do we
Mm,
really understand the process?
mm,
I think we have little glimpses of the process because we can kind of feel them in ourselves.
mm.
I'm going to attach this back to stillness.
Okay.
So last night, I was thinking about somebody and irritated by that person. And then it was keeping me awake.
Mm,
And I was thinking, okay, I should send them a nasty email or whatever,
mm,
you know? And then I thought, hold on, that's totally and utterly inappropriate and stupid. So how do I get rid of this energetic charge that I have,
mm,
which is holding on tight
mm,
to the resentment?
mm,
I don't even know why I'm holding on tight to the resentment. And I
mm.
think I can share this here, which is that he was one of these, well, it was a kind of betrayal type situation. At least that's
Sure,
how I
sure
hmm?
this is okay to share?
Well, I think so. I don't think it's betraying confidence. But
Okay.
anyway,
These things are also, collective as well as individual. They happen
it's
to more
very
than.
collective. But anyways, in my thoughts. And
Sorry.
then as I'm working with this, I think, okay, there is only one answer to it. I have to get quiet enough inside that somehow I will be able to contact whatever this is about.
Hmm. You're good at this
Because
kind
I
of.
know that it's about this experience, but it can't just be about that experience because I
Hmm.
can't let go of it. So basically, of course, I tracked it back to my father and I tracked it back to particular incidents with friends, male friends,
Hmm.
of a kind of betrayal.
Hmm.
And as soon as I did that, then I could get quieter inside and it
Hmm.
kind of dissipated. But I couldn't get to it without somehow getting to a quiet
Hmm.
place inside. Now, I don't know why that happens or how that happens, or even if it happens for anybody else. But to me, that inner quiet gets underneath some of the things which are bothering you. And if you can get to that place, then they open up in a
Hmm.
different way.
That's a nice story. I like you took a question into that space as well. Like, what is this? Why is this so important to me? Why is it so powerful?
Well, I often ask myself, what is it for? That's my favorite question. What is
Hmm.
it for? And then it's like, this is for something. This has a purpose as well as a reason. So it's got if you want to say a teleology, it's moving towards it's an attempt at a resolution which has failed so far.
Hmm. That's
And
nice.
and so if I can get to the quiet place, then it can open up and the resolution can somehow work its way through. After
Hmm.
that, I slept pretty well. And
That's
so
nice.
to me, it's like, and then I woke up this morning and thought, this is great. I've
Hmm.
had a new insight, which
Hmm.
was not there yesterday. And thank you to that person for letting me have this experience, which then allowed me to dig out something else.
So would you say that for you was also like a corrective re-experience?
I don't know exactly how it works, but I often wondered, like, why is it that just the understanding of it does correct it? Why is it that when you really understand it kind of from the inside and as an experience, that the energy, I suppose you'd call it the complex energy dissipates?
Yeah, I wonder if we have lots of immature, suffering, developmentally arrested parts of ourselves, that want to be listened to, want to be understood deeply.
Mm,
Like when we have that experience, in present time, it has the effect that's similar to what you're describing. There's a freedom that comes out of it, a release, because something has happened to do with being heard, deeply, deeply, profoundly heard. Yeah. So I wonder if, in that process, that bit of you got triggered by that guy, that little person in you got triggered, feeling like there was not a completion cycle of an incident of some kind, but there was a charge in that still,
mm.
and 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 so you were troubled by it, and then you had to kind of the kind of guidance from your learning, you could say, from your life learning, to kind of know that there has to be an aboutness to this.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so you
Yeah.
you dropped into that place of stillness as a way of kind of saying, okay, please arise out of the stillness in a way. What is what is this? What does this want in me, from me?
So in your practice as a Buddhist, if meditation practice, is that similar? Is that how you experience it, or is it different?
Um, well, I call it spaciousness,
Mm-hmm.
like because it feels like when I get triggered by something, or like I had an experience of I was in an agency on my own. The receptionist hadn't arrived, and I was seeing a client, and this person started banging on the door. Yeah. And I tried to ignore it for a while, but then I said, "Do you mind if I go and answer that?" They said, "No, no, no." And so I went and answered it, and met the person and came back, and my client was raging at me, absolutely raging for abandoning her, and and she had some sense of therapeutic kind of form, and knew that that was her protected space, and she was raging that I had, given this other person priority, not protected her space. And I said, "Yeah, well, you're quite right." She stayed raging and went away raging, right? And I was triggered, in the same way. And I felt I kind of went, I could really feel how affected I was by that. And I was very sorry about it.
Mm-hmm.
I dropped into that inner spaciousness, and and the first thing that arose was feeling helpless. I felt helpless. That's what came out of that spaciousness was you you know and memories of feeling done to as a child, or not considered, or even put through things that were awful for me, that was just because adults felt like kind of they didn't see me, hear me, they were hearing themselves, and I was just supposed to be obedient and accept that I couldn't protest. So I felt helpless, and so I thought, well, I think, there's a commonality between this person and me, in terms of nobody was there for me.
Mm.
Was that? And I need to be here for myself and expand my capacity to be with this helplessness, and open to those memories when I was a child, and be, able to speak to my own little guy and say, you went through a lot of that kind of behavior on the part of adults, within education, sometimes within the family, and that there was generally just a lot of ignorance around in relation to children and listening to children, and a lot of pressure on children just to be obedient. So I felt really kind of compassionate. And when my client came back the next week, I said I'd been thinking about that incident a lot, and I had already said I was sorry, but I knew it was very, very triggering and stirred up a lot. And it was surprising in one way that she even came back. For us, at least today, you don't have to pay for today. That is um, until we clear this, until we really clear this, because it was, it's important. It was evoked by me, but still it was evoked by me rather than something you just brought. And so it's kind of like our session, and it's not a session you have to pay for. And we'll see how it is at the end of today, whether we can just go back to, having sessions, or whether we still need to have more sessions to clear this between us. There was something about that of, say, coming out of that mind of that a client pays for a session no matter what, but if they cancel a session, they still have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
for me, it felt like it was on a par, like I had sort of canceled her session.
I mean, you must have thought about this a great deal before you did it.
Yeah, I thought about it a lot in between that. Say if I hire an electrician, he comes and he doesn't do the work properly. I don't want to have to pay for that. I'll call him back until he's done it properly, and then I'll pay him. And if it takes him, so I thought, well,
I like that actually, John. I actually kind of really resonate with that,
yeah,
particularly as I've had bad plumbers and you just don't want to pay them because
yeah.
like
And
it
even if
happens.
they behave badly and make me in one way or put pressure on me, sometimes I can take a stand there, but I've sometimes paid for things that I don't feel was my responsibility. But
Mm.
I thought, well, I've got a choice here to kind of say, well, this is a space I should pay for in terms of just not having a payment.
So
I'm not.
did you kind of think about that as an intervention?
I thought about it as what was true, good, and fair.
But did you think about it as a therapeutic kind of?
I thought about it as something that would ring true and say,
Okay.
in terms of that stillness, that tranquility, that it would resonate with that tranquility. That is not just about that client, but with a lot of people in terms of all sorts of transactions. Yeah. And it was I've done that actually several times.
That's very generous of you and compassionate. Of course, a lot of people will criticize you for this.
That's okay. That's
I know, and it's great. It's very
okay.
good.
But see, there's something tricky in that rationalization that says, "Oh, this is the work. This is the work," right?
Right.
But it's not just the work. It's
It's a job that you're meant to do, and you get
yeah.
paid for doing a good job of work. And if you're not doing what you consider a good job of work, it's unethical. So
Mm,
you can get into that whole different way. And I actually like I'm with you on this, and I'm not with those rigid, particularly kind of rigid psychoanalytic kind of things where you pay for your hour, and if you come, it doesn't matter. If you speak, it doesn't matter. If I speak, it doesn't matter. If anything happens, it doesn't matter. To me, there's something very strange about that.
in
Mm,
all sorts of ways. In all sorts of ways that
right.
um, and it would be good to have a session on it in itself for us to talk about it, because even in relation to different kinds of crises that happen when people cancel at the last minute,
Right.
they don't show up, that if you don't, discern what that's about, what happened there, without just saying, you've got to pay for that,
Yeah.
there has to be a kind of contextual rightness to that, still having to pay. And so I've always operated a flexibility around that. You
I do that too. You know, if there's actually a therapeutic reason why they're not turning up, in the sense that there's something going on with them which they're
Mm,
making the decision not to turn up, whether
mm,
consciously or unconscious, then I will consider charging them. But if
mm,
a person has a crisis, or if a person, basically just has a blip, it's like, well, I'm imperfect, they're imperfect, and I'm not going to hold them to higher levels of perfection than I hold,
mm.
myself. Uh, And so, yeah, so I have to swallow it. And that's just part of the business because, and this actually goes into a whole nother area, which is that, which I've been thinking about deeply, which is the difference between what I call unreal and real relationship, which is that a transference relationship is unreal. It's projected. But there has to be some aspects of the relationship which are real, which actually have a true reality to them. And there's
Right.
always a balance between those two things, which is the real one and the unreal one. And techniques which kind of develop the unreal aspect, they neglect the real aspect.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good way of looking at it. And so charging people ruthlessly, you know, is creates an unreality.
Yeah, it creates a strangeness to it. You and I maybe differ from other people, which is that there is a real relationship. I have a real relationship with my clients, and there's some unreality to it, and it is imbalanced because they're paying me and I'm helping them. But
Hmm.
that there is a sense in which we are two human beings trying to do something together, and that's real.
And we're not clones or genetically modified therapy.
We will be AI eventually. They'll take a picture of you, John, and they'll have your mouth move to say the right words, and there's a program behind you. They won't need human beings anymore.
I don't believe that's true. That's an unreality.
Okay, that's good. So let's just look at how we connect with that spaciousness, with that
Mm.
inner quiet.
Mm.
What are the practices that have allowed us to get to a point where that becomes part of our whole way of working and a natural aspect of therapy?
Well, I think it's a territory of being. We come across it now and then. We love it, in nature maybe, or maybe even in a sport, or fishing. Or I remember a teacher used to have me write lines a lot, about misbehavior.
I will not talk out in class.
Yeah, something like that, but like 1,000 times or something. But
Yeah.
I used to find when I could settle into that kind of the thinking of I could do this more than 1,000 times,
That
and
is so interesting. That's such a kind of Zen approach to it.
and I had a similar thing. There was in social work, there were suddenly a lot of um, competencies that you had to kind of measure students
Mm.
by. And there were like 36 of them, right? And you were supposed to, in a report, reference them all and give an example for them all, right?
Mm.
So all of a sudden, the whole process of assessing students became mechanistic in that kind of way. A lot of people resisted it initially, complained like mad about it, but I thought, I'm going to pretend I created this model. I created it and I'm proud of it. And and I don't think I mean that people have to do all of them. There might be one example that might exemplify, you know, 15 or 17 competencies. And so it's about in the spirit of it all. I will demonstrate that, but I'm not going to name them all each time. I'll
Right.
just make a statement that in this process of these examples, I believe all of the competencies have been illustrated. And nobody ever questioned me on that because I think I didn't get into opposition. I thought I created this model. This is my creation. I'm so proud of it. And I told other people, that's what the people, they didn't mean us to get tied up in knots about this. They just meant us to address all of these and think about all of these competencies. And so,
That's a very good way. And to me, you can't get to that place unless you've let go.
mm,
Yes, you've let go of resentment. You've let go of feeling controlled. You've let
mm,
go of the fact that there's an oppositional kind of element to you and this other
mm,
person, and that they're persecuting you. And to me, that is a part of practice, a spiritual practice, which is a practice of basically letting go of
mm,
this thing is bugging me. How do I get to the point where it's just not bugging me anymore?
mm,
And I
mm,
think your way, I'm going to have to use that because I have to say, a lot of things do irritate me. The idea that this person is me, and out of the goodness of their heart, they created this. Now, they're misguided, of course, but that's all right because we're all misguided. But they aren't out to actually get me, they're out to help me. How am I going to take that aspect
mm,
rather than the other aspect?
mm. It's like parenting in a way, in an impeccable way
Hmm.
where you aren't reactive and that all manifestations that come from the child, you feel are like opportunities for integration, transformation, and new learning. And through your example of how you deal with it, how you respond, how you demonstrate, like if I think of the people that I've really benefited from in my life, they've had a lot of patience, a lot
Hmm.
of calm and spaciousness, and they've been kind, and they've made positive assumptions about me in spite of myself. They've they've been generous in that and they haven't sort of judged me and reacted to me like it was something in them that was getting triggered, and there was a need to kind of, thwart me in some way. We have to be that in relation to
Right.
everything that comes our way, and that's very Buddhist. That there's even a Buddhist prayer that goes, "Grant your blessing that difficulties may be brought to my path," so that I can demonstrate, a kind of open-hearted responsiveness to whatever they are,
Hmm.
no matter what they are.
But I really like that because it's true. The people who've had most influence on me, they come from a place of spaciousness, as you say. It's not tight. It's very
Mm,
open. It's very welcoming. It's warm. And there isn't an agenda in there. There's a place of kind of like acceptance and just quietness.
mhm,
And it allows something in us to expand and
mm.
to be present because it is an invitation to be like them.
Yeah. There's also like what you said there, just there. It made me think of justice. There has to be also a justice system.
Okay, so before you go on,
Yeah,
explain a little bit more because I don't know if you're talking about the justice system out there with the courts and all the rest, or the
yeah.
sense of that something's just inside us, that it is right, that it's appropriate, that it's
Well,
fitting.
both. Both. I think there is a justice system out there that needs to be just right, and it's always a hypothesis about whether it is or not. Sometimes a process of clarification, depending on what follows. And say the example of that client and me going to the door, there was kind of justice I applied to myself.
Okay.
Okay, and in relation to say children, like had children who were very abused, working with them in a residential setting where something triggered them, and they, you know, ran down a corridor with a stick, breaking 16 windows, right? And then needing to kind of go and deal with them without anger and compassion, and saying, "Geez, Jimmy, that's a lot of windows you just broke." And I think, and that wasn't right in relation to what happened there in the kitchen where one of the other kids called you a name. It wasn't, the right way to deal with it. But you cannot, there's no way you can pay. We will pay. We will have to pay for those windows. But, we have a rule that if people do really big things wrong, then you have to spend a maximum of 3 hours in your room with an adult just sitting there, and both of you just being able to read, nothing else, just both of you, the adult and you, just being able to read. And then when that's done and dusted, the Windows thing is all over, except you will have to kind of after school, go out with an adult 3 days and work raking leaves and just tidying up around the place so that everybody else sees that there's something happening. And then
Hmm.
you will have to sit with you for 3 hours in your room, one of us will, and we can just read. And then after all this is over, we're back to, just trying again without any more kind of said about it. It's just really about next time when somebody provokes you like that, try to, ask one of us to deal with it or to help you. You don't have to deal with it yourself. We have to help you kind of find another way in your life.
Does it work? Did it work?
Yeah, like it worked even in the occasion that we didn't create resentment.
Right,
And
right.
our belief was that compared to what he'd been through, that was only maybe like putting one little marble in a bucket that needed to be filled with marbles, occasions of that kind of
Right, right.
period.
The piece where you get him to rake leaves, to me, that does have a sense of reparation. That you
Mm.
break something here, but you can repair something over here. And in the whole economy, if you like, of
Mm.
things, is a balance. There's some, and maybe that's when you're talking about justice. It's that
Mm.
balance, which is that if you do something that's not good, you have to do something that's good because the
Mm.
balance is off otherwise.
Yeah, and it is like an example that will go and touch that, go to that still point, that tranquility in that child. And he'll have a kind of Goldilocks experience of just right. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just
Not too hot, not too cold.
right.
Last words on stillness, tranquility, compassion,
Hmm.
spaciousness.
Yeah. Well, it's lovely how in communication we can co-create that, through turn taking, listening, playfully responding, learning from each other, thinking more deeply about things. It's all kind of the intermingling with tranquility, stillness, and the richness that comes out of that stillness. Whitehead calls it pure potentiality, and we all have more of that in us than anything. That's where we come from, and it's where we go back into that field of pure potentiality. And our lives, we're kind of representatives of pure potentiality. We're on a live stream. We're at a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we're teaching that pure potentiality field something about being human.
That's an interesting thought. We could go off on, Sheldrake and morphic resonance if we're not careful.
Hmm. Yeah. What are you left with?
I'm left with the sadness I sometimes feel that some of the people I work with can never touch that stillness inside them. They can't find it. That there's this jumble inside them. And I'm always hoping that it's not just about a person getting over their symptoms or having insight and all that, but that at some point they recognize that there's this place deep inside, which is, as you said, pure potentiality. And it is so rich and full, but it's empty. It's rich and full and empty. And that's when you get into all these paradoxes. And that if you touch that, something quite amazing happens. But if
Mm,
you don't, you're kind of lost. You're lost floating around, struggling with all of these things which happen to you or have happened to you. And
mm,
it's really sad, actually.
mhm,
And I sometimes wonder how people manage. I know that
mm,
sounds good. How do you manage if you can't get quiet?
mm,
Well, that's kind of torture. I remember that when I was younger, and I hated it. I
mm,
hated all of that jumble in my head.
mm,
And I don't have as much jumble anymore, which is much nicer. So that's the kind of bit, which is I just wish that, let's say we won't mention the names of certain politicians, but if they could manage to just be quiet and shut
mm,
up and go into their humanness,
mm.
they would behave much better.
Yeah, unfortunate. They need quite a bit of therapy.
They need corrective experiences. They need to sit for at least 3 hours with a therapist, and then they need to rake leaves.
Yeah. And then for it to all be kind of allowed to go away and you get back on the drawing board again.